in a way about green business. So I thought I would structure this around sort of the economics of going green, for a business going green. And for a business, there are costs and benefits of going green. And then I sort of wrap up and talk about how we need to have a much more purposeful approach within society and within companies around actually becoming more environmentally aware. So the first is, I think as I mentioned in earlier classes around, when we talk about that there's some trade-off between the economy and the environment, it's actually exaggerated what we often talk about. So if you look at our overall GDP spending, right, GDP, the output of goods and services and what we spend money on, the spending on environmental protection is less than 3% of our total GDP spending. So we said the economists like to look at what people do as opposed to what they say. People say the environment is very important to them, but do they actually spend their money, and do companies or all these regulations the government puts in place, are they actually costing a tremendous amount within society? And in fact, no, we spend about 3% of our total GDP on environmental actions. So those would be those marginal abatement costs, for example, right? The money that companies have to spend to abate pollution. This would be additional spending, again, on green goods as opposed to spending on goods that may have fewer environmental attributes to them. So we actually, when we show how we spend our money, only a very small part of our money actually is spent on the GDP, is spent on green spending. So another thing is environmental compliance. When companies complain a lot about, oh, these environmental regulations are going to drive me out of business, for almost all companies and almost all industries, environmental compliance is just a tiny portion of their overall expenditures. And it sort of follows that if 3% of our spending on goods and services is around environmental spending, for most companies, spending to meet environmental compliance is around 3%. What's the thing that companies spend the most money on by far? Employees, wages. Right? So wages are by far, and what we'll talk about later is, what is probably the main reason you want to adopt a green strategy for your company is because it empowers your employees, it makes you a desirable place for people to work. It has a lot of benefits in terms of your relationship with your customers, your marketing, your image within society. Those things are very powerful drivers of why a company may want to adopt a green strategy. The complaint that, well, it costs too much, really rarely holds in most industries. Now, there are some industries may be highly competitive, and you say, well, if I took a green strategy and my competitors are not, then okay, maybe, because they have a cost advantage. But again, even then, you may be able to differentiate yourself in the market because you are the green company in a market that otherwise is not taking on those characteristics. One thing I do a lot with energy efficiency, and it's very hard oftentimes to get companies and even individuals when they think about their own homes to think very much about energy efficiency and why it's very important. So you see that among operating costs for companies, if you're operating a building, about 30% of the building operating costs are related to energy costs, so that's fairly high. But again, because operating costs and say operating a building is a very small portion of what most companies spend money on, it's only 2% of total costs of most companies. So when they look at it and they say, well, how can we save money? Well, we can reduce our workforce, or we can find ways to restructure our workforce and save money. That's probably going to save them a lot more than putting a lot of energy efficiency upgrades into their buildings or into their processes. So it can be a hard sell sometimes to companies because, in fact, energy costs, for example, are not that great within their total costs. So here, overall for businesses, salaries are 80% of your costs. So at Royal Roads, far and away, we hear over and over, salaries are almost all of the cost of operating Royal Roads. Now I point out, if you all know, so BC has a carbon tax. BC is essentially the first jurisdiction in North America to adopt a widespread carbon tax. Our carbon tax is $25 a ton on carbon, which then gets translated into a tax that we pay on gasoline when we buy it, on propane, on natural gas. Any kind of carbon fuel has the carbon tax built into the price of the fuel in BC. A lot of companies like to complain that the BC carbon tax adds an additional cost to their operating in BC that they wouldn't have if they were in Alberta, for example, or another jurisdiction. But we haven't actually seen, the evidence has been that we've not seen a big hit on businesses in BC because of the carbon tax. I think most of us, we know that the 7 cents a liter roughly that we pay extra in terms of gas tax, we might drive just a little bit less, and overall it shows people drive 1 or 2% less, or use 1 or 2% less gasoline, which is good because it's changed people's thinking a bit, but it's not a huge, people are not seeing their lives completely disrupted because we've put a carbon tax into place. So when you think about a national carbon tax, or you think about a global carbon tax which has been advocated, then it doesn't look like the economy is somehow going to fall apart just because there's a carbon tax in place. But what it would lead to is a shift away from carbon-intensive activities and make companies and individuals think about how much carbon they're actually emitting. We talked about negative externalities, and so the externalities, those external costs, become internal, and we have to take those into consideration. So we would move our consumption away from carbon-intense goods and services. So that's basically the argument around the carbon, that environmental taxes and costs, environmental costs don't matter all that much. And that's where if you think about, well, my choice between am I going to drive or not drive, there's not a lot of substitutes. I mean, I could ride my bike, I could ride the bus, but a lot of times when we're driving someplace, we say it'd be very difficult for me to go grocery shopping without having my car. It'd be very difficult for me to get to see my grandmother without having my car. There's no bus that runs there. How else am I going to get there? So we go ahead and make that trip. We say, well, there's very few substitutes. When we start looking at products that are sitting on the shelf when we go into the grocery store, I mean, how many of you all regularly shop for environmentally friendly products and you choose the environmentally friendly one? And will you do it in every case or in some cases?
In affordable cases.
In affordable cases. So you're looking at, sort of...
When it's in my willingness to pay.
When it's in your willingness to pay. So, and sometimes that's based upon the attributes of the product. So you might have a higher willingness to pay for a product that you would say, well, this one is clearly better, right? I put these two up. So here's a couple of different cleansers that purport to be green products. But when we go and buy cleaners, for example, in the market, we're actually thinking about a whole bundle of things. Every product that we buy has this whole bundle of quality. Is the product going to be high quality? The convenience, so they have these little sprayer nozzles and they'll tell you how great their sprayer is and why it's better than the other one, or the different size of the bottle and this and that. The image of the product, you're both projecting that image internally to yourself. Like, how do you relate to yourself in terms of the products that you consume, but also externally. A lot of people that I know that have hybrid cars are environmental consultants, and they say, well, I can't drive an SUV or a big pickup truck, so I'm an environmental consultant. I need to drive something that projects an image that's associated with the environment to my potential clients, or I want to appear to be a good person to other people. So this image piece, and then there's the environmental piece. Can we make a connection between our purchase? So what, buying these green cleansers, why would you buy these instead of the traditional product? What environmental benefit are you actually?
Has better quality.
Better quality in what way?
Probably putting less harsh chemicals around you.
So we would say, well, if these are better somehow for the environment, that's what they're purporting, they probably would be putting forward that somehow the traditional cleansers or the soap is causing some harm in the environment that these are avoiding. So maybe these have some sort of natural soaps that break down better. The other ones are going to go implicitly into the waterway and kill fish, or they're going to ruin my septic system, or whatever it is, harm that's going to come. I actually don't know. I don't know. Do you know when you walk in what the actual environmental benefits? You guys are taking environmental chemistry.
There's also phosphates.
So there are certain things that can you look at the label on the product and figure out what they have or don't have, and there's so much information that you have to know, right? And so some things are trying to do different green scorecards. Have you gone, if you go shopping for fish, there are different types of certifications so that you know which fish are sustainably caught and which are not, or different products of trying to communicate that to you. But we do have a really hard time trying to figure out what are the actual environmental benefits that we're buying when we buy the higher priced good, and then how much are we willing to pay for those extra environmental benefits. And then for some products, they try to make it more explicit where they say, okay, we have shade-grown coffee, costs a bit more, but it actually, we can connect that to the non-destruction of the rainforest, to types of birds that continue to be nesting in the non-destroyed rainforest, etc. And they sometimes will try to take you down this chain to help you understand, what it is that you're buying, what are the environmental attributes that you're actually buying. And you mentioned quality. Do you think most people perceive that environmental products have higher or lower quality? If you're buying a cleaner, would you think that this works better or worse than a traditional cleaner?
Worse.
The general impression of people, according to consumer surveys, is that, well, it must be worse. That stuff's kind of nasty, but it's going to clean the pots or it's going to clean my stovetop, whereas this stuff is too mild, right? Oh, it's mild on the environment, but it's also too mild to work very effectively. So in fact, for a lot of things like cleansers, people perceive that the quality is lower. Now, in terms of organic produce, you may perceive that the quality of the good is higher, and that's what you're buying, right? In part, maybe this tastes better, it's better for the environment, but it's more, just the way that it's grown and produced is better. So in the end, that the quality of the product may be higher. So maybe that's why you pay 2 or 3 times as much for free-range eggs, because you believe that the quality of the product is higher than the quality. But that's not true for all environmental products. For many, people perceive that the quality of the product is lower. When people actually purchase most of these products, quality is the number one thing that they're looking for. They want a product. Why do you buy the brand name over the generic? Right? People pay more for brand name products over generics. The leading product in almost all brand classes are brand name products. So why would people pay extra for the Clorox brand as opposed to the brand, some generic, no-name brand?
More trust.
In general, we have perceived that branded products have higher quality because we trust that we know that company, we know that Kleenex tissues have a certain quality level. They pitch themselves, they advertise themselves as being softer, better, more convenient, all these things, as being a higher quality product.
But still, for the language of the ingredients, for the green products specifically, it's more difficult to understand, more difficult to determine what are these ingredients. So I'm not sure if the consumers trying to understand the ingredients, is it harmful or not, or is it good?
Yeah, so this one's not even really telling you at all what the green attributes are. It's got a flower on here, they call it green works, and therefore you're in a way assuming that it's green. You don't actually know unless you grab this bottle and really compare it to a traditional bottle. Could you even tell whether it's different? Why don't they just put their traditional product into a green bottle and call it a green product? I mean, you're not sure. One thing, are you surprised that they put this?
Yeah.
Do you associate Clorox with clean, with environmentally friendly?
No.
I associate Clorox with bleach. And bleach to me does not seem like an environmentally friendly product. I'm actually surprised Clorox puts their label, although they're going for the quality that we recognize that label. You know 7th generation? So they're a company that's built around, Clorox is a company that has mostly traditional products and then has a green line of products. Whereas 7th generation is a company that's built around, the whole company is built around the idea that it has environmentally friendly products. So when you go in to buy, if you looked at these two, which would you trust more as an environmentally friendly product? I mean, in general, most people would say this, but then if you looked at the price, this one is probably, the traditional product is probably $2.99, this one's $3.99, and this one's $5.99. And then you start wondering about what that willingness to pay is and what the benefits that you're buying actually by buying that higher price product. And when they go out and they look, most consumers will not pay extra for environmental products.
Is that a perception changer then, to increase the price of said product, to perceive value and quality has increased?
So
because I'm paying more?
So there's an interesting piece around why do environmental products, there's also been studies around why do environmental products cost more? Does it actually cost more to make this cleaner for 7th generation than for the traditional cleaner? And most of the studies show that for most things, like why does organic produce cost significantly more in most cases than regular produce? Is it really that organic produce costs a lot more to produce? And in most cases the answer is not really. It might cost a little bit more, but it's rarely reflected by the scale of price difference that exists in the marketplace. Why do they charge more? They charge more because they have a very small but very dedicated group of consumers in many cases that come to the store looking to buy a green product and say, I would never buy the traditional product, I will pay more and I will buy the green product. Well, because you're very dedicated to their product and their brand, they're able to charge more because of that price elasticity piece where there are fewer substitutes, there are fewer things, other things that you're looking for, and so they're able to charge you more for the product. Overall, green goods, if you look at almost all product categories, green goods are way off to the side, right? Like they've got 1% or 5% maybe in some cases of the market, but 95 or 98% of the market is still the traditional product. Green goods remain, for the most part, niche products. And that's a problem because, what's it about? Well, it's about cost. If these all cost the same amount, then you might be much more inclined to buy the green product. I know I would. I go into the store and I look and I want to buy the green product, but if it costs twice as much, my economist in me starts saying, is it really worth paying? Is my willingness to pay high enough? And am I buying enough environmental benefit by purchasing that green product to actually make it worthwhile? Is it really worth an extra $2 or $3? Am I getting $2 or $3 worth of environmental benefit by buying this product instead of the traditional one? That's a tough one. In a lot of cases, I don't know. One, you have to understand. So this is our literacy and understanding of which products matter. And there are some people out there trying to tell you, like, have you seen the list of which organic, if you are going to buy organic produce, but you couldn't buy it all the time, but you're going to buy, they have the dirty 10 or whatever that you should be buying. If you're going to buy organic things, these are the first 10 that you should look at. What are they? There's carrots, apples,
Kale.
Things that they use a lot of pesticides, particularly on, and things that are like carrots that are in the ground that would be more exposed for a longer period of time. Those things that they spray, the spray goes away pretty fast, and so it doesn't stay on the product. I wanted to bring up, so there's an interesting case in the BBA program. You guys will probably come across this in one of your classes. This was the entrepreneurship people here at Royal Roads introduced me to Tom Sakey and this company TerraCycle. Does anybody know TerraCycle? This is a really interesting book. If you want to read about a green entrepreneur, this is a very interesting book. So Tom Sakey was a student at Princeton. I think it was in Princeton, and he was in his first year. He's Canadian. He was in his first year at school, and he's trying to always think of business ideas. He's an entrepreneur, always trying to think of business ideas. He observed that the school was paying for someone to come and haul away all the waste food from the cafeteria. So farmers would come and take it for their pigs, and they would have to pay them to haul it away. And he said, and he was actually at a friend of his house who was growing these massive pot plants, and he's like, wow, how do you grow such great pot plants? And he said, well, it's all about the compost that I use. And he's like, really? How do you make the compost? Oh, I take my old, my leftover kitchen waste and stuff, and then I compost it. I put it on my marijuana plants, and they just grow like crazy. He's like, wait a minute. This is my business idea. If I take the kitchen waste, and the school will pay me to take the kitchen waste away, I'll turn it into compost, and people will pay me for the compost. What better business model? Now I don't have to pay for my inputs. I get paid for the raw material for my product, and someone pays me for my product. How can I go wrong? So he wrote this up as a business case. He took it out. He got all kinds of, he kept winning competitions and pitching it. And so he decides to go for his idea. And then the whole book is about how he ran into just multiple problems as he was doing it. One of the problems was, if you don't actually know, and you don't have the space, and you don't actually know how to do composting on an industrial scale, if anyone's been following the Victoria case, where they're picking up food scraps, and they still don't have really any place in Victoria in this area that can do the composting, it's much more complex to keep the odors down, to run the process efficiently, etc. So he first ran into problems with the composting. Then he finally got that settled. Then he came up with his next big idea. And TerraCycle's whole idea as a company is built around the idea of using waste to produce goods. So now they've got a nice little tagline. So what he started to do is he figured out that essentially all plastic pop bottles, no matter what type they are and size they are, the lids are the same size. And they're essentially, no matter whether they're Coke or Pepsi or Sprite or anything, they're interchangeable. And so he started collecting all of these plastic bottles, and pretty soon he got school kids actually to collect and sort the plastic bottles for him. So he makes a liquid compost, he composts, creates a liquid, puts it in the bottles, labels it, and then sells it. So now he's got armies of school kids working for him. They get a penny a bottle. So his main market is, of course, their parents. And he's not having to pay. He's only having to pay a penny a bottle for the bottles that his products go into. And it's an interesting story how it's all evolved. But then he was going bankrupt because he was selling through all these little specialty retailers, and he had to go around and deliver 20 bottles of his product to each of these retailers. He's like, I can never make a business. I can't make enough. I have to sell in volume. I can't make a business. It takes too much time and effort to go around from store to store. So he started selling to these big stores, Walmart, Target, Home Depot. He called, I think it was Home Depot, he called the buyer from Home Depot every day for more than a year, and the guy hung up on him every day until finally he's like, okay, you've been bugging me for a year, now you got 30 seconds to give me your pitch as to your product. So he told him that, he said, interesting, okay, I'll take 20,000 cases. Because to Home Depot, 20,000 cases is a pretty small order. He hung up, he's like, awesome. He's like, wait a minute, we can only produce 1,000 cases. So he had to then go through this whole process to expand his production and start delivering. So he's become this much bigger company, and as he says, what he gets and what he really works for his company is, one, he's selling the sizzle, not the steak. Yes, he makes good compost, but that's not what people ultimately buy. They're buying his story, right? They're buying the idea of the product. And if you are trying to market a green product and you can't get people to buy the idea, you're going to have a tough time marketing your product. You have to get people to understand and buy the idea. So the sizzle, not the steak. I put that up there. If anybody's been to Amarillo, Texas, there's a famous place called the Big Texan Steakhouse. And the gimmick of the Big Texan, which is this massive place with a big cow out front and tour buses lined up, is that if you can eat a 72-ounce steak in 1 hour, you get it for free. So they started doing this, and all of a sudden everyone starts going there. Oh, I'm going to challenge, right? Everyone's challenging each other, and of course if you don't eat it, then you got to pay $79 or something for the steak. And so they are doing a booming business trying to challenge people to eat the steak. They say that the most unlikely people are the ones who can usually eat it. The really big, tough guys come in, can never finish it. So he says, sell the sizzle, not the steak. Think of your product as a mass market product, not as a niche market product. You'll never make money if you try to sell it in a niche market. And then he says, you know what, like green products, if we're using recycled materials as our production, if someone's paying us for the raw materials of our products, we should be able to sell our product for less. We should not be charging more. Environmentally friendly products should charge less than other products. So he says he tries to come into the market with a product that actually costs less. And now they've branched out. They do not just the compost, but they do, if you've seen, they started making out of some sort of M&M wrappers. They started making handbags and different things, discarded different kind of juice boxes and discarded products. They started making a whole range of products. They said, again, at first they thought, oh no, M&M's is going to come in and sue us for taking, it's not technically illegal to take a discarded product and turn it into something else, but they said maybe they're going to get us on the trademarking of M&M's and all this. Well, as soon as they saw M&M saw this, they're like, oh, we'll pay you because that's great advertising for M&M's. So now he's got another revenue stream of advertising from the companies that he's recycling their products. So anyway, you can look and you can decide whether you think TerraCycle has the right way, but he's got a very inspirational story about how to sort of turn some of these negatives and overcome some of the problems. Another green business that I'll tell you about, how many know the Interface Carpet story? So it's really touted by, do you know the Rocky Mountain Institute? And Amory Lovins and Hunter Lovins. So the Rocky Mountain Institute did several books on, what's the famous one? On green companies and green ideas. What they're saying is we need to completely rethink the way that we do business. And like TerraCycle, rethinking and saying, well, waste essentially is our business. It is, we will define our company and only produce products that we can use waste materials as the raw materials for the products. And then we can sell them for a lower price because we're using waste materials that no one else wants. You hear this story about, you know, people might, in the future, we could be, instead of thinking of landfills as a problem, we may be mining Heartland landfill for all the resources that are available in that landfill for free. They'll give them to you. So think of a business that will use waste. So Interface Carpet, this guy, Ray Anderson, had this epiphany where he said, think about the carpet business. Actually, our business is to sell you something that we hope falls apart soon so that you have to come back and buy something else from us. Right? Because if we produce a product that's so high quality that you never have to buy carpet again, we're going to go out of business. We can't continue in business. So you hear this term about the planned obsolescence, right? That they actually make your electronics to break down after 2 years so that you have to buy something new. And so Interface Carpet said, well, you know, this whole business model is wrong because then the other piece is that in almost all product categories, the producer is not responsible for the end of life of the product. So the producer sells you carpet, and if that carpet is full of a bunch of toxic stuff that's going to leach out of the landfill, the carpet producer says, hey, that's not our problem. That's your problem or the landfill's problem, but we sell you the carpet. And just like electronics, right? So they don't really think about what the end of life story of the electronics or what's in the electronics for the longer term. So he rethought this whole green business idea. They said, what we need to focus on essentially is the issue of producer responsibility. And I'm going to give you some examples. BC has been doing a number of things around producer responsibility. And he said, take carpet. What if we made a carpet that in fact, we don't even sell you the carpet, we sell you carpeting services. So we sell you floor covering for a period of time, and then we will come and take that carpet back. And why will we take it back? Well, because that carpet is 100% recyclable. So in essence, you will want to, so every 10 years, a commercial building may be changing out its carpets, but if we can take that product back and recycle it into new carpet and resell it to you, we're going to dramatically lower our input costs. We're going to keep things out of the landfill, so you don't have to pay for the landfilling of it. It's going to become over its life cycle cheaper to you. It can be that we sell it to you and then we get it back, or that we continue to own it. So we sell you the service of the carpet, and we continue to own. Do you really want to own carpet? Who cares? What you want is carpet on the floor. So they started this whole business around, environmentally friendly carpet. So one, they make carpet squares. They've gone to mostly making carpet tiles because they say, well, if you spill something on the carpet, you shouldn't have to replace the whole carpet, right? You just take up one tile and put a new carpet tile down. This is what their sort of one style of their carpet. Secondly, they say their carpet is recyclable because, as it says, if we spend our days recycling these products into new materials with zero scrap going to landfill, zero emissions into the ecosystem, that's the vision of our company. So they're going to try to become a no-waste company and a net environmental impact. So any environmental impacts that they have, say, in delivery of the carpets, they're going to offset through carbon emissions or ecosystem offsets and other things. So they say it's a whole new way, and they've created a whole new market and a whole new recognition, and in almost all environmentally friendly buildings you see interface carpet or something like it. So they've created this whole new market class out of this idea of replacing things. So one famous story is out of British Columbia is around paint. So paint is one of the most toxic things in the landfill. So he said, how can we keep paint from going, most people, you have a half-empty gallon of paint, you move into a house, what do? You throw it in the trash. And it goes to the landfill, it gets crushed by a bunch of other stuff, it starts leaking out of the can, it leaks out of the landfill, it's highly toxic, it's very hard to deal with. So you've got this problem. So they said, so we can try to ban paint, it's hard to sort through everyone's trash and keep it out, or we can also take a proactive approach and we can say, let's do producer responsibility, let's make it where every producer in BC and seller of paint has to take old paint back. So this is the case right now, just like we have now with electronics. Electronics was a later product that they worked with. There were some BSC teams actually that worked on some of these producer responsibility things for their major projects a couple of years ago. So the paint story, the paint companies just said, oh, this is crazy, we can't do this, how are we going to set this up? Well, they had to partner with the paint stores to say, well, the paint stores have to be the collection agencies. So you can take your old paint to any paint store in BC and just drop it off. Say, thank you, I don't want this old pink paint anymore, I don't need it, I don't want to put it in the landfill, I can't, I'm not officially allowed to, it's against the law, and I can drop it off at any paint store. So now any people that sell paint have to take paint back. The companies that make paint at first said, oh, this is going to be this huge cost, it's going to drive us out of business, it's going to create all these problems. And in fact, a couple of years into the project, 10% of their raw paint feedstock comes for free, essentially, from the paint that people bring back to the stores. Because you can take old paint, put it back into the whole process of making new paint, they're now getting 10% of their feedstock for free, where they used to have to use oil and other raw materials that they bought. They now are using paint, the old paint, recycling it back into new paint, and can use it. So the same is happening with electronics. You can take your electronics back now to any store, right? You got a battery, you got a phone, just take it back to any store that sells electronics. They take them back into a producer responsibility system as well. So, that's sort of changing around the idea of how businesses work. So now, within the idea of, well, if there are all these benefits to companies of going green, why aren't they doing it? And so there's this joke, it's the economist joke, you probably won't like it around. So the economist joke about there's two people walking down the street, and one of them looks down and says, oh, there's a $100 bill on the sidewalk, wow, I'm going to pick it up. And the other one says, oh, don't bother, because if it was a real $100 bill, then someone would have already picked it up. It must be fake, right? And so in economics we say, well, are there actually big real dollar bills just laying around on the sidewalk that people are not picking up? And I say, at Royal Roads, yes. As I say, I've done a lot of work with energy efficiency. And dollar bills that are left on the sidewalk are things like, so at Royal Roads, they had what's called an energy demand report. They came in, had consultants come, BC Hydro paid for consultants to come in, do an energy demand report at Royal Roads on ways that we could become more energy efficient. And they were showing that there were things like the stove igniters in the kitchen. We had pilot lights on our stoves in the kitchen, and for an investment of, I think it was $7,000, we could save $10,000 a year on our natural gas bill. Okay, invest $7,000, you can get over 100% return in the first year, and you're like, so I saw this report about 2 years after it had been produced, and I said, well, you've done this, right? And they're like, oh no, it wasn't in the budget. And I'm like, no, wait. They're like, well, we have a budget to pay the utility bill, right? But we don't have a budget for capital improvements like that, so we haven't done it yet. And I'm like, well, it just doesn't make any sense. Wait. And there were a bunch of other things in this whole report around things that you could do that would have a 50% annual return, or even a 30% annual return. So if you could invest your retirement savings and earn a 50% return or a 30% return, people would be like, oh, that's fantastic. How else can I get that kind of return? Well, a lot of energy efficiency improvements that you make at your house or that companies make can get really, really high 20, 50% returns. Or we've been doing a lot with solar hot water. And we say, people say, we had a BSC team again run the numbers, and a solar hot water system here is relatively inefficient and will have a 20-year payback. People say, 20-year payback, forget it, too long. Well, I guess 5% annual return. Are you earning 5% on your money in the bank? No. I mean, maybe you can get more in the stock market or something, but a lot of investments that people have are not earning 5% a year, and yet people look at something like an energy efficiency improvement that most studies show that people want a 2 to 3 year return. That means they want a 30 to 40%, 50% return on invested money for energy efficiency, but they're happy to get a 1 or 2 or 3% return on their retirement savings. This is illogical to economists, but this idea, are there big bills left on the sidewalk? Yes. There are actually a lot of improvements and things that we could do that would save us a lot, but then, so why do we leave these big bills? Well, one is the relatively low cost of energy. So you can save, you can pay back that hot water system over 20 years, but you're only saving a few $100s a year. So is it worth all your time and effort to actually go, and I know I've gone out and tried to source hot water systems, and I don't have a solar hot water system on my house yet, partly because it's been such a hassle to try to get people to come out and give you estimates, to try to understand the market, what the different systems. So there actually is a big investment in time and effort that you have to go through in order to do it, and energy prices ultimately are really low in DC in particular, but in other places too. If energy prices remain low, it's not worth your time in a lot of cases to actually do these things. As I said, the budget process, a lot of companies don't have the right budget situation, structure. They exist in different departments. They exist in different categories within the budget. And so energy efficiency improvements or other improvements may not take place just because of the way that things are budgeted. Hard to finance. If you go down to borrow money from the bank in order to do renovations or certain things on your house, it's often easier, or to buy a house, it's much easier than if you go down and say, look, I'm going to go put $20,000 of energy efficiency upgrades in my house, which is going to save me $5,000 a year on my energy bills, and I'll use that money to pay you back. And banks say, ooh, we're not sure, we're not in a place to evaluate the savings, how can you guarantee those savings? Most banks are not set up to do energy efficiency financing, and so it can be hard to borrow money. Do the same thing. Oh, I need to borrow money to buy an electric car because I would save money on the gas that I spend. Banks might be reluctant on that basis to lend you that money. Hard to measure. So we can do savings, but it's often hard because energy usage changes by the temperature outside, the time of year, and different things. Oftentimes they want to prove, how can you prove energy savings? And that can be very difficult to prove in many cases. I just put several energy efficiency improvements in my house. How can I say how much the new ductless split heat pump is saving me versus the new LED lights? It's hard to figure out unless I measure each of those separately. And in general, people have a lack of sort of energy environmental literacy. Now, I've mentioned some of these things before, but so you guys can do well in this quiz. Which energy efficiency improvement has the greatest benefits? Should I put insulation in the roof of my house, put a new furnace in, new windows, install a solar hot water system, or seal and replace the doors.
What's cheapest?
Which was the cheapest?
Why would I look at what's cheapest? I should be looking at what has the highest return. This is one thing. So we're not going to have time to go. There's a whole section in the book on benefit cost, and it talks about how people often look at things that have very low costs. So I could seal my doors at very low cost, and I could save. It would probably have a relatively high return, but the amount of money I would save is fairly small compared to, in most houses, if you have a house with any appliance or furnace that's more than 15 years old, you should be looking to replace it. Now, it may cost you $10,000, but you're going to save so much more doing something like that than a lot of other things. In this case, we did studies, we got data. They did home efficiency audits of homes around Lower Mainland, or around the lower island here. And they found that while insulation in the roof was good, the doors replacement was pretty good. Replacing windows would never pay for themselves. Windows are lousy insulators. No matter how, you can put triple pane windows, you can fill them with argon gas, you can do all kinds of things, but go feel the window. Any window is going to be cold, it transmits, it's a lousy insulator. So therefore, replacing your windows has very minimal, in the end, impact on your actual efficiency. The new furnace has far and away the highest return, has the highest cost in many cases. Insulation can have high returns and have fairly low cost, but you can only get a certain amount of return off of the insulation. So heating and cooling are the things that actually burn a lot of energy and cause a lot of environmental impacts. I mentioned this book, How Bad Are Bananas? There's a couple of different versions. One's I think the UK version, one's the Canadian version. It's a great book telling you about the carbon impact of different goods and services. And what it talks about is, in your home, 70% of your energy costs are around here heating the space. And in Texas, it's cooling the space. So if you want to make an energy efficiency improvement, you've got to go after the 70% of the energy that you use, which is improve your furnace, improve your air conditioner, your water heater and your refrigerator are the other things, because they heat things up and they cool them down. I think I told you I had a team that went out and looked at these water coolers and what's the environmental impact of these. And everyone was thinking, well, it's the bottle, producing the bottle's bad, and driving it to and from campus. Like 80% of the impact of these water coolers is because it's plugged in and people want hot and cold water off of the tap. Because actually, the bottles are very efficient. They get reused 100 times. Driving them to and from campus is not great, but they're bringing usually multiple sets of them at one time. But most of the impact is because of the energy of heating and cooling the water. That has a big impact. The other thing, and as I said, when I calculate my carbon footprint, 80% of my carbon footprint is transportation, and particularly flights. If you fly very much, that's going to be your primary. So that's where they say any fruit or vegetable that comes by air, or product that comes by air is terrible. Anything that comes by ship is not so bad, has less impact. The other thing that people don't take into consideration, it doesn't get calculated in when we talk about our carbon footprint, is sprawl and land use. It doesn't get directly impacted. So when DC municipalities have to calculate their carbon footprint, their sort of zoning process does not come into that. They look at, house emissions, building emissions, these sorts of things, but they don't look at how their land use decisions impact that, and it's something that gets overlooked. Again, I've had students sort of do this thing. It costs $7,000 extra to buy a hybrid. Should you buy it? At 30,000 kilometers a year, you'll save 745 liters of gas and 1.8 tons of carbon. Okay, that sounds good. So it's a little over $1,000 in gas savings. So it would take you 7 years to pay off your hybrid. So is that good? Well, 7 years is probably the max life. And one of the things, why don't people want to put in that solar hot water? The average person lives in a house for 5 years. And if the next people won't pay you back for it, you don't get a return on your investment. So Same things here. If you're going to own your hybrid for a long time, maybe worth it. But for most people, if you're going to own the car for a shorter time, the gas savings is very large, but the carbon, saving 1.8 tons of carbon is only worth $44 at $25 a ton. So the environmental benefits in terms of the carbon savings isn't that great, you know. But you get a lot of feeling, and people wrote on their tests a lot about doing the right thing, putting in the low flow shower heads, gives you a personal feeling of doing the right thing. Maybe you can show off to your neighbors, those sorts of things. So how much you're willing to spend and gain, you know, it depends on which sort of what you value. Opportunity costs. Which is better for the environment? So I love this. This was in Germany. They have the hot air thing versus the paper towel. So which should you use? Which one is better for the environment? And the answer is? According to How Bad Are Bananas, it doesn't matter. If you're worried about stuff like this, you're not paying attention to what really matters. What matters is how you heat and cool spaces. It matters how you travel around, the transportation. People get really caught up on little, trivially things like this, and people lose their focus on what actually produces a lot of environmental impact and what produces a lot of things. What do they say? It depends in part how the electricity is produced. If you're producing coal-fired power, that may be worse. It's not that different. And the carbon impact of these things is so small that it doesn't make that much difference in the whole scheme of things. We've been talking about behavior change because a really interesting studies have shown, you know, what really matters, where we can go through what the different physical changes you can make in your house. But the number one thing that actually changes environmental use is changing behavior. And there's a really interesting case study of this. And this is just one of these, I keep meaning to try to write it up myself. If anyone's interested in it, we can talk about how we can do this. So have any of you all been to the Sauk First Nation, the most solar community in all of Canada?
Yeah.
You guys did a field trip out there? You got to see all the solar panels? Yeah? So the Sauk First Nation, just out here in Sauk, they have a very interesting First Nation to study, because they have a plan to become much more independent. Because they say we need to make ourselves independent for a variety of reasons. We need to reduce our dependency on essentially handouts, people not having work, etc. So they started as part of this saying, look, we should become energy independent. In part because we get a lot of storms, we lose power a lot of times. If we have our own backup power system that's locally produced, we can become less dependent on BC Hydro. It's interesting, when we do surveys of why people want to put solar hot water systems, becoming independent of BC Hydro becomes one of their main. I want to become energy independent, which a solar hot water system won't take you there, but a big bank of solar panels will take you farther. This is photovoltaic panels. So they sell power back to the utility during the day, and they buy power at night. But so they have a lot of solar. These are hot water. So they put solar hot water on almost all of the band housing, and they have this big installation of photovoltaic. But what they found in this whole process was they estimate that they're getting twice as much energy savings from the fact that through this process of putting these new energy things in, people became aware of how they were using energy and started changing their own behavior around energy. And so they started using much less energy because they were aware of energy and they started paying attention to it. So rather than leaving the heat up all day or leaving windows open or doing different things, they started becoming much more energy efficient in their actions. They have a whole project that they're doing with do they have their greenhouses? So they're building solar-powered greenhouse to create employment. It's a very interesting case, and it's being used by a number of First Nations now to look at what they're doing and how they're doing it. So this case study, but capturing that, writing this up, this is a really interesting study of can you capture that behavior change and the impact of the behavior change as opposed to the impact of these technological changes. Because it's something there's very few studies out there in the literature. And this is an estimate that they've made, but they haven't written it up in a formal way. So one of the main things for business is around green buildings. So we have a green building. We have a LEED Silver, the LIC building. I actually talked to the architect the other day because we're hopefully going to get another building connected. He was telling me about that it has natural ventilation in the LIC building. Do you guys find it comfortable or uncomfortable in there? I told him I found it okay most of the time. He says it's very unusual to have a fully natural, and you see that it has rainwater collection systems. The whole thing is an extremely environmentally conscious building. And one of the big questions out there is, will people pay more to buy or rent green buildings? Do you think companies are willing to pay for green attributes? If they are, again, it's this thing. If companies and individuals are willing to pay for green buildings and green products, firms will produce them. If they don't build buildings with poor insulation, etc., because that's what they build them because that's what the market's demanding. Because actually, most builders find that homeowners will not pay for a lot of energy efficiency improvements. They look at two houses. One has a lot of energy efficiency improvements, but they look at the sticker price, and one costs $20,000 more. Even though you'll save $5,000 a year on energy costs, people will go for the cheaper way, which is a real problem in the market. It makes it very hard to build environmentally friendly things. In the commercial real estate market, people take a more investment approach, and in fact, they find that yes, companies are willing to pay more. And then they look at what are the main benefits. Are they willing to pay more because of the energy savings in the building? And the answer is no, for the most part not, because energy savings are such a small piece of the overall cost of the building. As I said, it's about 2% of the operating cost if you consider the occupants of the building with that. All the money in the building is in the employee. Most of the money in the building is in the employees. And so why would you build a green building, and why do you support a green building? It's because the employees have been shown to be more productive, they miss work less often, they're happier in their jobs, and they are more committed to the companies that they work for. So the companies get a big payback from the green building, not from the energy savings, but because the workers are happier. And it's an interesting piece. And so when you go out and you're trying to sell, so a lot of you are going to be in organizations, trust me, you're going to be sitting at a table and you're going to be trying to convince someone to spend a bit more on something green. And if you run all the numbers, it's going to be hard to make that on just a strict, say, energy efficiency standpoint. But if you run the numbers and start talking about some of these aspects, about how green management is really good management, so what does it do? Well, employees report, you guys, when you go out of here, you're going to want to work for a company that takes environmental issues seriously. If you go to work for a company that is essentially not aligned with your own values, you're going to feel this disconnect, and you're going to say, this is not a place I want to work. It's not a place I want to be. So companies are in competition for talent and for people, and those companies that can stand out as being environmentally friendly, will empower and attract their employees. They empower their employees and their customers because they're always asking you. If you work for an environmentally friendly company, they have green teams. Green teams go out and try to find what are our 3 goals for the year? We're going to use less paper, we're going to use less power, and we're going to get more people to bike to work. And then they try to figure out how they're going to do that. Well, what you're doing is talking to people, just like you guys did with your focus groups and with this whole process. It's going out, talking to people, and getting that information back about what is it that customers want, and it makes everyone feel really engaged. There are cost savings. If you look at the Walmart case, Walmart's saving a lot of money on energy efficiency improvements. And improving service, improving that connection with your customers and your employees. All right, finally, just to talk, it's interesting, I taught for 3 years in Germany, and being in Munich and being in Europe. How many of you have been in Europe or in a place that's really focused? Do you sense that something's different? If you go to Scandinavia, you go to Europe, most of Europe is so far ahead of North America in terms of their societal attitudes about the environment. So I did a project, again, something that needs writing up. If you want to work on this with me. We did surveys of students in Germany, and just looking at the German, so at the German university where I was at, there was no sustainability office. There was no sustainability curriculum. There was no green student organization. There was nothing in terms of what we call education for sustainability within the North American system. And a lot, if you go to, so we have a small sustainability office here, but if you're at UBC or SFU, they have these massive sustainability offices, and they're doing competitions between dorms, and they're figuring out how to remove trays from the cafeteria so that you use fewer condiments and different things. And they're doing all these things progressively to try to make their campuses greener. And we do a number of things like that here as well. But in Europe, they don't do it. They don't have that whole infrastructure. And so I was asking the question, well, why don't you have a sustainability office when so much of what you do? And they said, because we learn it and we do it from when we're little, right? Like, we don't think about this stuff as something you should learn in university. If you don't know it by the time you get to university, it's almost too late. Most people have their habits set by their families, by their parents, by the society that they're in. And so by the time you get to university and try to teach people about sustainability, you've often missed the boat. So this idea of purpose, and the one that I used that I was just so impressed with when I was there, was the whole idea of riding bikes. So why don't kids ride that? So my kids at their school, so at my school when I was growing up, there were 6 bike racks out front, and every one of them was packed full of bikes. Everyone rode their bikes to school. At my kids' school up here, Wishart School, if there's 1 or 2 bikes at that school during a day for over 300 kids, that's impressive. Now there are some people who walk. It's a neighborhood school, so some people walk to school. But the majority of kids, 65% of kids at most elementary schools, come because they get dropped off by their parents from their cars. Right? They drive to school. That did not happen when I was a kid. Nobody's parents drove them to school. Everyone walked to school, rode their bikes, etc. So why do people not ride their bikes? So there are all these studies. You can look at, there's a huge literature out there. There's a huge community-based social marketing thing about how we get people to ride bikes again. So, it's because it's not safe. Interesting. Well, as I said before, people who ride their bikes live much longer than people who drive cars. So what's not safe about it? Well, part of it is there's a lot more cars. If everyone else is driving cars, then maybe you feel less safe. Not so many people are doing it, so they're doing all these different ideas. The walking school bus. You heard about this, where they walk groups of kids to school and they pick people up along the way, and then they go to school. There are all these different ideas. That takes a lot of organization and different things to do. What do they do in Europe? So in Munich, everywhere you go, there are these lines painted on the sidewalks, and they ride their bikes like crazy in Munich, all over the city. And it's like, well, why are they riding bikes everywhere in Munich? But there's a small percentage. Victoria has the highest percentage of bike commuters of any community in Canada, one of the highest in North America. But why? It's something like 5% or something. Why don't we have more people who bike more often? Well, if it's so dangerous, what we need to do is essentially teach kids to be safe. So in Germany, every child has to have a bike license. And so the city of Munich comes out to every school. They bring a truck. They have trained people. They bring bikes. And they do a whole lesson plan, I think it's in grade 4, for all kids in every school in Munich to learn to ride a bike, and you must earn your bike license. And that teaches you must know how to obey the safety laws, you must ride safely, you must do all these things. So why don't kids ride bikes anymore? It's partly because we don't teach kids how to ride safely, we don't teach people that this is normal. So one of the things in Germany, I love this, at the school, when you came up to the school, so we're all about parent participation in schools and all this. Here on the outside door of the school in Munich is this hand that says, "From here I can go alone." And so in Munich, the whole idea is that kids are independent. And in fact, all the kids starting in grade 1 come to school on their own. And they're taught from a very early age that you need to be independent, you need to be able to take care of yourself. And so this whole idea about, well, let's teach kids to ride bikes safely, and then they can go off and go ride their bikes. It's this purpose and this carrying something through and understanding what barriers are there and then doing it. That it's very impressive. So, to a degree, Purpose in Our Own Backyard, Solar Colwood program, is a program that's trying to learn about how to, bring purpose, bring green environmental things into the city of Colwood. As you learn, not all of it was successful. The faucets the shower heads that they handed out were not always installed. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but there were a lot of things that they're doing within that program, trying to sort of instill these issues. So, I'm going to break there. That is my spiel, my rant on green business, a lot of different aspects. Again, if we want to be more environmentally friendly, why do we wait around for the government to do it? Let's do it ourselves. Let's buy green goods. Let's support green companies. Let's support these green activities. That it has to come out of society rather than being the other way around. So, thank you.